Time Travel Astronaut here with a Let's Play of Secret of Evermore for the Super Nintendo. This game was made by Square in 1995, and this playthrough was requested by Mark Wikström. Part 0 here is we're going to talk about the game a little bit and also talk a little bit about the game patch we're running. So if you're interested in the actual gameplay itself, you'll want to jump right ahead to Part 1. Like I said, though, we're running a gameplay balance patch. You can find a link for it down in the description, but makes a few changes to the game that looked interesting to me at a glance, so I decided to try it out for this playthrough. We're recording this after the playthrough is done right now. It was about 40-ish videos. It was also one of the very first games, well, it's the very first game where I got almost everything. Normally I miss all sorts of stuff if you're familiar with my other series, but managed to get almost everything. We do miss a few spells, but I have little supplement videos that show how to get them. So be sure to watch those if you're curious, but let's look at what this patch changes really. They've gone ahead and they've lowered the damage on the weapon charge attack because the level 3 charge was just too strong. So originally it did 4 times damage, and now that's down to 2 3/4. And then even the level 2 charge has been lowered from double damage to 1 3/4 damage. So in the base game, you're really just rewarded a little too much for charging your weapon all the way. So that's been changed a little bit now. Other change to weapons is they've implemented shared XP for weapons. So it's, what is this? It looks like around 25% of your XP for a weapon trickles down into everything else of that weapon type. So like every 4th kill with an axe, all the other axes will get some XP. And that's great because usually you'd max out a weapon, you'd get a weapon to level 3, and then you'd find the next weapon, and you have to start all over again. And it wasn't a massive difference, but you'd be a lot closer to leveling up than the base game with the patch, which I liked. So you'd get a new weapon, you wouldn't be completely hosed. Kind of a big change is now you require your full weapon charge to cast alchemy. If you're familiar again with the base game, you could just cast magic whenever the fuck you wanted, and things got a little out of hand because of that. But now you basically have to wait for your stamina, or whatever you want to call it, has to be back completely before you cast any magic. So that definitely got me in some hairy situations when I played, and it makes the alchemy a little less ridiculous. Alchemy is still way better than your weapon in a lot of situations. In the same vein as the shared XP on the weapons, now the alchemy formulas all have shared XP. And this is great. This is the main reason I wanted to try this patch. But basically they've gone and they've grouped all your spells into 5 basic groups. You've got your physical attack alchemy, which is stuff like lance and crush, explosion. Element attack, that's flash and fireball. You've got your healing spells like cure, revive. Then you've got your buffs like atlas, reflect, and then everything else is in the 5th group like levitate and stop, reveal, or whatever. But if you use a spell, all the other spells in that group gain XP as well. And that's just amazing because there's a lot of good spells in the game that are actually kind of shit because they're level 0 when you learn them, and you don't want to set the time aside to actually level them up. But with this patch, a lot of the times you'll learn a spell, it'll have 2, 3. I think some spells were almost level 3 or 4 when I learned them at the end of the game. Max level for a spell is 9.99, so you can try out a lot more of the spells, which I definitely do. My favorite change by far in this patch. They've also gone and they've tweaked the stats a little bit. They just overall made all weapons do about 20% more damage, so you're not charging up your weapon constantly. They also lowered, I think they lowered the dog's stats in every way. In some cases they actually have the stats because the dog character is just incredible. The original game's practically about the dog. That's how good he is. But this patch makes him a little more reasonable. And for the same reason, if you're used to the base game, you might be a little caught off guard by situations where the dog would normally save your ass, and that does not happen anymore. Player evasion is now capped at 64%. I guess there was some sort of weird exploit for like speedrunning where you could get 100% evasion. I don't do any cheesy shit like that, but your evasion doesn't go over 64% anymore if you're running this patch. Then they lowered the defense value on some of the items for the main character, the guy, because his stats got a little out of control with the helmets and bracelets, I guess. I don't really think that's true, but that's the way it is. Helmets aren't that hot shit in this version, apparently. I also said they shared weapon XP, so your weapon levels up quicker, but on the flip side, to begin with, the dog's weapon attack leveled up way too fast, so they bring that way down, as I actually make it all the way to the end of the game before the dog gets his weapon maxed out, which that is not normally what happens. They also lowered the XP required to level up your spells. Not by much, but using alchemy and leveling up alchemy is definitely a lot more fun. They've gone and they've modified the stats of almost everything in the game. Most of the monsters, a lot of the bosses. Some of the bosses, they modify a little too much for my taste. Those are usually the bosses I die on when you're watching, in case you were curious. But the game did feel, well, I haven't played this game in like a decade. I was challenged in several points. We'll say that. Some of the alchemy formulas were changed a little bit. Specifically, I think Barrier requires an Atlas armlet now, so you just can't do weird exploits with that spell. It's an incredibly overpowered spell anyways, I think, so that's fine. And then other than that, it's really just minor stuff you may not even notice if you're familiar with the game. Some of the item costs have been tweaked a little bit. Spells do a little more damage or less in certain cases. But overall, I enjoyed the patch. I mean, I was able to beat the game with it, so it's got that going for it, right? Then I guess one last thing to talk about is the little overlay border art we have here, which I admit is very shitty looking, but the animations in the game look a lot better when you're running at 60 frames per second, and you actually can't upload a video to YouTube at 60 frames per second if it's only at 480. So we've got this little overlay art over to stretch the video up to 720. And you have the option to watch it at 60 frames per second, which should be a lot smoother if you're picky like that. There you go. But I think that's enough jibber jabber. Let's just get right into the playthrough.